Turn that damn truth on!
Well, Razorback fans, we know that right now it's pretty chaotic with the transfer portal going on for not only the Razorbacks, but for all of SEC, all of college football in general. It's almost hard to keep up with, but one guy that keeps up with it all when it comes to all things college football is Brandon Marcello, and he joins us right now here on the show. It's Brandon Marcello of CBS Sports and 24/7 Sports, national college football writer. And Brandon, as always, man, appreciate you joining us. How you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing okay. I'm not in the portal.
That's good. Give it time, though. You know, that could change at any given time, it seems like, because it's all over the place. And we'll just start with that in general before we get into specifics with Arkansas. This transfer portal thing, everyone wants different things done with it and changing and all of that. But, man, just what are your thoughts on where it stands right now? The current state of the transfer portal in college football, what are your thoughts?
They need to corral it somehow, some way, and my belief is they're not going to be able to until there's actual federal legislation that will end up signifying and labeling college athletes as a special class of an employer-employee relationship without actually calling the players employees. And the NCAA is actively working on that. There's some hope there, more hope now, that they'll be able to get something done within the next year or two. Now that there is, the political party shifting there, more Republican, there's some belief there with Ted Cruz heading up one of those big committees related to all this, that he'll kind of take this to the forefront here in the next few months, and who knows. But until then, I just don't see how college sports or college football in particular can bring this all in. You can't put the genie back in the bottle, so to speak, without some federal legislation. And even so, what that's going to entail is that there needs to be some type of collective bargaining with players, which will then allow the players a seat at the table and to discuss what works best for them and also what works best for the schools when it comes to windows for the transfer portal, limitations in the transfer portal, and all of that. Individual schools have tried to curb transfers at this time of year in December by putting like clauses in the contracts, the NIL contracts, that say they can't say, I think technically legally, you have to stay through the bowl game, but some of them just smartly put in there like you have to stay here through this date. Otherwise, you're not going to get your last check or two. And so that's why you're seeing a lot of programs, not a lot of programs, but several programs able to keep their rosters intact. I think the perfect one that kind of encapsulates that is Colorado. Travis Hunter just won the Heisman Trophy, is going to be a top 10 pick in the draft, and he's still going to play in their bowl game. And so is Shedeur Sanders, all their big stars at Colorado, and they're not in the playoffs. So this is something that individual schools, you can manage to keep most of your roster there on campus in the December month by, one, the culture you build, and secondly, with smart written NIL contracts that will keep them on campus.
Well, one of the teams that, of course, we know is Arkansas, who have basically lost everybody, it seems like, out of the transfer portal. 28, as where it stands now, could change at any moment. But 28 players have jumped into the portal from Arkansas, a lot of them being big-time contributors. You're talking about offensive linemen. You're talking about secondary players. You're talking about running backs. It just seems like a lot of teams deal with this, but Arkansas, at least in the SEC, has maybe dealt with it the worst when it comes to guys jumping into the portal. What do you make of that? Is it simply money? Is there more to it? Just what kind of do you feel like is going on at Arkansas and why they've had so many departures compared to previous years?
I think it's all complicated, but it's just not a good thing when you see Arkansas like leading the SEC as far as departures, especially when it's a coach who's been there a while. This isn't like a new coaching staff coming in, and so they need different types of players to fit systems and all that. And also Arkansas, for the first time in a while, in several years, they've got the same staff coming back. Especially at coordinator spots. They're not having to change things on the fly there, so the players know what to expect. So maybe some of these decisions are philosophy, like I don't fit in the system here, or, it's probably a lot of it has to do with money. And the reason why I say that is because practically every move in the transfer portal when it comes to guys on the two deep is not necessarily playing time. it comes down to the money, because they're going to go somewhere where they're going to get the same amount of playing time, just about, and the decision-making process there for them is usually steered by money. A lot of folks, some folks, they'll join the portal to see if that will kind of put the feet to the fire for some programs, including the one that they are currently at, to pay them more potentially. So whenever I see a lot of players entering the portal, to me, it comes down to a money issue based off of everything I've seen across the country. Unless you're like a Marshall, which just lost their head coach to Southern Miss, and a lot of those players left the team almost immediately, and a lot of them are expected to follow their coach down at Southern Miss. So this just isn't a good look for Arkansas. And personally, for me, someone who has ties to the Razorbacks, I don't follow the portal all that closely anyway. If I did, I would probably go insane. And God bless every fan out there that manages to keep up with this every day. I mean, I got a lot on my plate anyway with the playoff coming up and all these other feature stories and traveling I'm doing. And to see like 1,600, 1,700 players in the portal, and then those players going to other places, keeping track of all that is mind-boggling. And so it's just in a lot of ways, like, this just isn't sustainable in this sport. It just isn't. And coaches are getting out of the business or taking voluntary step down in their profession because they don't want to deal with this crap anymore. NIL, the portal, and it's got to be corrected. You can't get rid of it, but they got to figure out some guidelines for this, and they need the federal government to step in. And I don't, again, that might be another year or two away. I know we've been saying that for 2 years, and we're going to keep saying that until something's done.
Yeah, and also to the point, and looking at it specifically from Arkansas, you think about the players that they had on the roster they were counting on next season. And last time we talked to you, you talked about it as well. Sam Pittman said, he's like, hey, we got the money. We got the money. The question of a GM has been brought up, because it doesn't look like the NIL rules are changing, at least not at this point in time. But the GM role has been brought up. Sam Pittman said in his press conference that they feel like him and Hunter Yurchek have talked, and it's fine for now. Maybe in April they hire one, which I didn't really understand. But either way, what are your thoughts of schools, especially big schools in the SEC, having a designated role, a designated GM to help handle a lot of these situations instead of just putting it all on the head coach and the coaches in general?
Oh, I didn't know Sam said that. Wow. A lot of coaches out there prepared for this the last year. They've hired GMs. They've hired front office personnel. They've been preparing for this with the NIL obviously going on now, but more importantly with revenue sharing coming up, because that is a huge undertaking. And I think you're making a mistake if you don't already have a GM on your campus running things in the front office. You need that. I point to schools like in Oklahoma State, for example. Mike Gundy, old school coach, we all know that. And he obviously doesn't really like the way things are going in college football now. But, a year ago, he went out and figured out, I just need to bring in an NFL front office. And that's what he did to prepare for all this. And I think every coaching staff, every athletics department needs to be doing that. And if you're not, I think you're making a big mistake, because I don't see how these coaches can take that on and just like say, hey, I'll deal with the agents. I'll deal with all these players and all that, in addition to running the program and obviously running practices and bowl practices and also recruiting high school kids. I mean, December is like the worst month ever every year for coaches. And I just don't see how you can navigate this right now without having a general manager or someone leading your department.
So also giving it to the situation with Arkansas is that the bowl game, they are playing in a bowl game. I don't know if people even have paid attention, but they're playing in a Liberty Bowl. And Arkansas is among other teams, but just how do you combat this part of it, where I know you talked a little bit about the situation with Marshall opting out of the bowl game, but with Arkansas in particular, they're going to have guys out there that have played for the Razorbacks for the very first time, is what it's going to remind me of. It's just so many new faces out there. Can there be anything done to where the bowl games can still be bowl games, have it happen, and then also be able to give the players the opportunities to get into the transfer portal if they want to? Because it just seems like the bowl games are already waning a little bit, but right now there's such an afterthought that it's pretty much going to turn into a glorified spring game between two teams, it seems like.
Yeah, and we've seen that already. We've seen the last couple of years teams playing their third and fourth stringers in games and it just not being either competitive or really all that interesting. And you're right, it's become like spring games, except you're playing against someone else. And the bowl folks aren't happy about it because they're just going to see dwindling ticket sales and potentially dwindling television ratings. It'll be interesting to see what the TV ratings are for some of these bowls in December this year, especially with some depleted rosters, whether people actually tune in, because that's where everybody's getting their money these days. What do you do to curb that? I mean, maybe, like, I'm just throwing ideas out there. Like, maybe, if a player enters the portal on a team that's bowl eligible, maybe somehow have something in there, unless school starts at your new school during the bowl game or bowl preparation, you got to stay on campus and play in your bowl game. You're committed to that school through the end of the semester. You don't start at your new school until the next semester. So maybe they should find a way to be able to keep them on campus and play in their game, even if their heart's half in it or whatever. Maybe there's a way to do that. The other way, I think potentially, and it's just going to pull more money out of the bowl system's pockets, which they're not going to be happy with anyway, is maybe the bowls should directly pay players that play in the game themselves. We've seen that with some preseason like basketball tournaments, obviously with some NIL deals in Las Vegas. Maybe you can do that in the bowl system, because as it stands now, there's just not a lot of interest in several of these games, because their rosters are absolutely just decimated. And especially, there's not a lot of group of five fans out there, but there's a lot of group of five rosters that are just been obliterated, because their star players, their top five players or so are going to get bigger paydays elsewhere. So they've left. And so what they built their entire team around is gone. And so you might have some teams out there that have won 9, 10, 11 games in the group of five going out there that'll look nothing like they did during the season, and that's unfortunate.
Well, another thing too, Brandon, and again, I feel like I'm asking about rules and regulations and what they could do, but it seems that coaches all understand it, fans all understand it, even people in your position understand it, that, tampering is a thing that goes on, and it seems prevalent, and not have to name any schools or anything specific because there's not really any evidence of it just yet, but and in your knowledge and what you've seen and people you've talked to and everything, just how prevalent is the tampering aspect of the transfer portal and NIL with schools? And if it's as prevalent as it is there anything that can be done about it? I know it happens in all sports. It's happened in NBA and in the NFL, but just how prevalent is it? And is there anything that can be done about it at this point?
I don't think so. There just isn't. Until this becomes actual professional model where there's collective bargaining and there's actual guidelines and also penalties in place that, if you're found tampering, you can do this or that. Same with, you see it in the NFL. There's nothing they can do. And practically every school, whether it's directly or indirectly, there's some tampering going on. And by indirectly, I mean, some of these players' agents will go talk to someone who's got some connections to another team and be like, hey, would they be interested maybe in him if he were to join the portal? And the coaches have no idea that's going on. So it's just confusing for everybody, but tampering certainly an issue. I remember, Wake Forest coach Dave Clawson, he just stepped down here a couple days ago. And I remember a year ago and 2 years ago, he was telling me about tampering allegations, and was being upfront about it, about people coming and stealing players from his roster at Wake Forest after they're winning 9, 10 games. And, some of these coaches, they're beaten down by it. And it's one of the big reasons why Dave Clawson stepped down at Wake Forest.
Yeah, it's evident, it's there, but I don't think there's anything going to be done about it too. But what will be pretty fun, on a more positive note, before I let you get out of here, Brandon, college football playoff. You talk about it. That is also a thing that is happening. First time ever, we're going to see 12 teams. It's officially set. I know that there's some things that people may like or dislike about the format and what's been set up for it. But I feel like this is one of the first times in a long time that I could look at 12 teams. I don't know if all 12 could win the national championship, but more than half of them I could totally see happening. Just how do you feel about the overall playoff format, but also who you're looking at to be the favorite and maybe a team that could end up shocking the world and winning a national championship?
Yeah, I think it's fairly wide open. Interestingly, like Oregon, of course, being undefeated, they have the number one seed, but I think they actually had the most difficult draw. They could potentially have a rematch against Ohio State in that tight battle they had earlier this year, a 32-31 win for Oregon at home, and that will end up being in a neutral site. And it's in the quarterfinals. And then the semifinals get even more difficult. The team with the best draw, I think, is Penn State at the number 6 seed. They get SMU at home here on Saturday morning, and they've got a favorable draw from there. It'll be interesting to see with Georgia. Carson Beck, he's out for who out knows how long after injuring his elbow in the SEC championship game. So what are they going to do at quarterback with the backup there? Does that change the offense a lot? I think it does. And they'll be facing the winner of Notre Dame, Indiana in the quarterfinals. So there's a lot of weird, interesting possibilities here. Right now, my pick to win the championship is Oregon. I think they're just the most balanced team out there. They got a lot of veteran leadership. They can stay healthy. I just like them overall, but that draw is very tricky. I also like Notre Dame quite a bit. And what they've got going on. I think they've flown on the radar. They've beaten the teams by an average of 26.8 points this year, which is the second best average in the country. And by the way, their first round opponent, Indiana, an in-state game. Indiana's number one in the nation in scoring margin this year. So you got the top two scoring margin teams in there facing each other, and also the two most opportunistic teams in the playoff as far as turnover margin. So a lot of common themes and storylines in this among all these teams, whether it's just takeaways, explosive offenses, but mostly teams that are just really good in the trenches. That's why SMU's in the playoffs, why Penn State's in the playoffs. That's why everybody is in there. Everybody's got those guys up front to get it done. As far as the format, it needs to be tweaked. They'll probably go to 14, which has been discussed quite a bit. I think you need to reseed things on Sunday. And by that, I mean, right now it's set up to where the 5 highest ranked conference champions get into the field. And then the 4 highest ranked conference champions receive a first round bye. So you see teams that might be ranked, number 6 in the rankings or whatever, get pushed up to number 3 because they get that first round bye. I think what we need to do is just get rid of the automatic qualifier there where you get a first round bye if you're one of the 4 highest ranked champions, and just like the NCAA basketball tournament, just set it up to where if you win your conference championship among the 5 top conferences, you're guaranteed a spot in the field, but your ranking's your ranking. So you won't be able to be pushed up in the rankings, so to speak. And the ones who get the first round byes are just the top 4 teams. So if that's 3 SEC teams one year, tough luck. If it's 3 Big Ten teams every year, tough luck. But I think that's how it needs to be. It's way too complicated. Like, I can't imagine like a casual fan when they watch that ESPN broadcast and they're ranking them out, and then they have to put 2 rankings next to their names in the bracket to show like what their actual seed is and what their ranking is. Like, college football just can't get out of its way most of the time, and they just need to simplify everything. Everything needs to be simplified. Everything just is too damn complicated, and it extends all the way to the CFP.
I know. It's just like you think something so simple that there's so many different teams and so many different leagues that have done this for a long time that they could just,
Well, it's because there's just so many damn voices in the room, and so many of them want it their way, and then they have to compromise. It's just, listen, we need some type of federal legislation with all that other stuff, transfer portal, NIL, and all that. And then after that, they just need to have a football commissioner. Yes. Have someone oversee it all. But the problem is that these conference commissioners don't want to cede control. They don't want their power to go away. So they don't want to answer to someone. They don't want to answer to a football commissioner. But we need it. Football is unwieldy now. It's gotten too big for its own good. And we're starting to see kind of the foundation crack a little bit. And I don't want to see that thing crack so much where it falls into the ocean, because we're going to get there in 5 or 10 years unless there's some changes made.
Yeah, there could be some things that once they're gone, you don't get them back.
Right.
And that's what you want to avoid at all cost, because college football is great. It's fun. We love it, and we want to continue to love it. And listen, it's going to change, but it doesn't need to change in every way and so fast and so rapidly. But it should be interesting here, not only in the next couple of weeks, but also in the next few years for college football. But the guy that's going to always talk about it, of course, is Brandon Marcello. You can follow him on Twitter or X at @bmarcello. You can also check him out at CBS Sports and 24/7 Sports. But Brandon, as always, man, we appreciate you joining us. Have a happy holiday season, my man, and we'll be catching up with you next year, all right?
All right, we'll do. See you, John.